Det finns ju liksom inga ursäkter att komma sent till jobbet med sån där klocka på väggen. Varmt välkomna tillbaka. Har ni haft en bra fika? Fantastiska breakouts. Det har varit rätt mycket energi, va? Ni ser ju snyggare ut än någonsin. Eller också har ni bara bytt plats med varandra. Nu ska vi ha en spännande eftermiddag när vi ska få del av en hel del bra grejer. Att mycket handlar om mindset. Vi har en perfekt storm som vi ska hantera. But we will start with cybersecurity. We've already mentioned it several times, but we need to dig really deep into what's really happening in the cybersecurity landscape. And you've all met him before, and he needs a really warm applause. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mark Anderson.
Okay. Hey, so I'm here to shamelessly flog our wares. For any and all of you who are interested in this crazy idea of flow and interaction, applying the two fundamental actions behind every element in the universe, there's a book. And if you go to stratnews.com, you can get the book. It's the first book ever done on this. And that's all I'll say about that. It's pretty cool. And then a disclaimer. So you saw the title earlier, and I want to be sure I say this very carefully. Yes, we have briefed the CIA and the NSA. Matter of fact, when I briefed the NSA, they made me sign these papers. Very nice lady. It took about half an hour. And she said, "You realize I'm using the words capital punishment." I said, "Yes, I understand that." So, of course, I'm not going to talk about what they said during that meeting. But we have briefed, I would guess, the top leaders in the three-letter groups in every one of the Five Eyes, except for New Zealand. So UK, US, Australia, Europe. And we'll talk about it today. And this book, which is not for sale, Theft Nation, How IP Theft Drives the Chinese National Business Model and Its Effect Upon the Global Economy, by my son, I'm the proud father, Evan Anderson, is the cabinet-level briefing paper that we've been using for this set of briefings. And although it's not for sale, if there's anyone here from the Swedish government, or if you have any friends who are in the Swedish government, we would be happy to give this to them for free. So, not kidding. So let us know, let me know. We are having some of those meetings this week, and we would, we live for this stuff. So we would be happy to meet with them or whatever it takes, FedEx this to them. We will do it. So I want to do this in two different ways. I want to tell the story that was advertised, which is what is the briefing that we've been giving these folks. And I also want to talk more about the general landscape of cybersecurity. And I'll try to combine these, I'll try to weave these together, but it's a little bit of a trick. Our expertise is not in the tools you should use to protect your company. We know something about that, but that's not what we do. That's what Checkpoint does. Our expertise is in understanding the business models that countries have and how certain models have driven nations into the position of institutional theft of IP and how to fix it and the importance of fixing it. We've taken the point of view that if you're only buying more antivirus software or whatever, that will be a never-ending struggle that you will never actually win. It'll be a radar trap problem where every time you get a better box, they get a better box. Ultimately, it'll be AI bots against AI bots. But you're never going to win that race. The state of China or whoever will always have a better bot than you do if you're a company. You will lose every time. So how do you win? When we first began this work, the reason we began this work, and I'll tell you again, the consortium is called Invent IP, which stands for Inventing Nations versus Nation-Sponsored Theft of Intellectual Property. When we began this work, there was no Invent IP. And I take a lot of time out to look at countries and how they make money, and companies and how they make money. And by accident, we backed into China's flip. China was a communist country. And in about 2000, they flipped their business model. Didn't announce it, just did it. And suddenly, China was what we now call an infomerc, or infomercantilist business model. Let's see. I should mention that if you're more interested in this after this is done, there is a thing on the net at nbc.com in 60 Minutes. So 60 Minutes, which is our best known investigative news team, did a piece on our work on that book, and it's called The Great Brain Robbery. So you can look that up. And that became the best watched investigative episode in 60 Minutes history. So people really are interested in this subject. We were looking at China, and after 2000, and they made this flip, we started to see something which was really weird, and it was hard to understand. And at first, it was just stealing IP. It's like, okay, they're stealing IP. That's not too uncommon. Well, then they're stealing a lot of IP. Well, then there's very organized stealing of IP. Now there are multiple levels of stealing IP. Now they're stealing targeted IP. And every year, it got more and more interesting and dangerous. I think if this had been happening with the state of Indiana, it wouldn't matter. But with a country of 1.3 or 1.4 billion people, it mattered a lot. And when it was a complete national business model, it mattered a lot. The first thing we had to do was to share that information. When we started out, no one knew this was happening. Sounds kind of funny now, but no one knew. So we actually had to get Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg Businessweek put on the cover of their magazine to stop stealing our stuff. We had to get the information out that IP was being stolen by a state. That was kind of a crazy thing. Commercial IP, not military. Well, that's a long time ago. I remember this one moment, about 3 or 4 years into it. We had now looked at every level of, not the words, but the actions coming from China that were related to this whole new business model. And we'd seen this model out of Japan in the 80s. So we had it, this isn't new. They had picked this up from others. And it's interesting, it's always Asia. So Japan and then South Korea did to Japan what Japan had done to the United States. Really effective, took no time at all, a couple, 3 years. And then China took it from South Korea and improved it again. But there was a moment when the improvements were so stunning, it wasn't believable, really. And this light bulb went on for me, and I thought, is it possible that a country, an entire country, could be totally organized for this one purpose, economically? And the answer was yes. Every part of the banking system, every part of the espionage system, every part of the subsidization system, every part of the currency system, all working as one to take somebody else's, your IP, steal it, repackage it. It's called re-innovation. Isn't that a cute idea? Re-innovation. And then sell it on the global market at a subsidized rate of half price. That's the plan, pretty simple. One of the steps was the banking system. China said they only owned 4 of the top 10 banks, but they actually owned all of them. We had to find that out because the banking system was really important in the creation of all these subsidies. The currency system, how did that actually work? It was manipulated, but it looked a little bit like it was okay, but it wasn't okay. It was actually being manipulated on an hourly basis. It was crazy. It was called the peg, but it wasn't a peg at all. It was constant intervention in a market to achieve a known goal that was about 40% less than what you should pay. So your companies would get underpriced. Our companies would get underpriced. Every part of this, even stating what the GDP is, because it's a political number, it's not a real number, became a target for us. We had to understand what was going on. The subsidization program. So, as an example, when Huawei goes out to sell against Ericsson, They have something between 15 and 30 times more credit, export credit, per company, one company, than the next 7 countries altogether for all companies. Imagine competing with that. When they go into Australia and they say to Telstra, we'd like to sell you something, and they go, well, we're not sure we need it yet. Well, what do you need? Oh, it's a new product, doesn't exist yet. Well, we'll make it for you. Well, it's going to take some time. We have time. How about, would you do that? We'll do that. Well, it would take a whole team of like 20, 30 people. We'll do it for free for a year. Really? For free for a year? I'll do that deal. When they came to Europe and they bid against Ericsson in every legacy major replacement for all the infrastructure for Europe, country by country, all the real players, all the real companies that weren't shells for the state, were bidding within 5% of each other. Alcatel, make a list, right? Ericsson, 5%. Huawei was 40% off. They won every contract. And I think, in a sense it's fair because the governments have to take the least bid usually. It just about wiped out the entire industry. That was the end of Nortel. That was the end of all these guys, Nokia Networks as we knew it. Siemens Networks got sold. There wasn't enough money left for an industry. And Huawei grew like turvy, like topsy. So getting all this together and finally saying, is it possible that an entire nation does this? Yes, it is possible. And guess what? It grows pretty fast. There was a moment when I remember asking the question, how could, and this will sound funny, but it's true, how could a nation of 1.2 billion dirt farmers, which is exactly what was going on in China at the time, say 35 years ago, suddenly be the wealthiest nation in the world? Is it possible? We've seen a lot of nations come and go. We've seen a lot of GDP, Look around. Is this possible? And if it's possible, what's going on? So we took a look at all the GDP historically throughout Asia, because there's a lot of cheap labor around Asia. And Americans thought, it's cheap labor. That's the answer. That's why they're making money. It's cheap labor. Nope, it's not. In fact, only half of the GDP numbers announced for the last 30 years could be explained by that. So it wasn't cheap labor. Well, what was it? If it's not like Indonesia, if it's not like Vietnam, if it's not like Laos, what is it like? Well, it's not like much of anything. You've never seen this before. It's the most sophisticated machine for fraud and theft ever invented as a national business model. It is extremely effective. And literally the other half of the GDP came from cyber theft and other theft of IP. Wow, stunning. So when you say, oh, they're going to give us money for One Belt, One Road, where did that money come from? It came from Ericsson, or it should have been Ericsson's money. It should have been Nortel's money. It should have been Motorola's money. It should have been Alcatel's money. But it didn't go there. So now let's just take a breath. And if we're looking at cybersecurity today, what are we facing? We just went through this at lunch. It's a difficult situation because you have to ask yourself, if you're the CEO of a company, what am I protecting and what am I protecting against? So let's say that you want to protect against the usual hoi polloi trying to get into your network. That's doable. And that's not too expensive. Let's say that you are a supplier for a military here or somewhere else, and you make something important, radar or something like that. That's almost impossible that you'll be able to protect that. It's not impossible, but it's going to cost you an extremely large amount of money, and you'll probably fail. You've all heard this. The F-35, our most important project, is almost completely in China right now. It's been stolen from Australia, from America, from various suppliers, and we think the complete blueprints are in China. And we've hardly launched the airplane yet. So a lot of work and money went into protecting those blueprints, but they still got lost. It's difficult, if not impossible, to protect against a state-funded actor. Imagine that you're Ericsson, or imagine that you're any company, and you're not going against Huawei, you're going against the nation of China. You have teams that are military teams whose only job in life is to come into your network day and night, and that's all they're doing. Can you resist? And the answer is probably not. So it's difficult. We're at a difficult time right now in cybersecurity because of that. And you go to these meetings where everyone's talking about what to do, but the fact is you can look around that room and go, every one of you who's a target is going to get penetrated. And you'll hear people who are sophisticated in cybersecurity saying that now. So they're not going to say, I'm going to keep them out. That was 3 years ago. They don't say that now. It's not that you shouldn't have a firewall, but it's not going to work. But when they get in, I'll help you. That the new is like, when they get in, I'll help you. So we'll use heuristics or we'll use something else to tell you that they're in there. We'll try to wall off the attack. We'll identify the attack and notify you ASAP, and then we'll do something else. But they're in there. And a lot of folks will say once they're in, you can't get them out. I think some people would say they can, but it's hard. It's really hard. You probably all know about the story. The New York Times got hacked by the Chinese. They brought in the best guys in the world, which is FireEye. They cleaned out the entire place. Every single system is cleaned out. And then they light it up, and it's infected again because the thermostat, talking about IoT, right? The thermostat reinfected the entire network. So it's tough. This is really tough. And I think, I'm not going to lie to you, I don't think it's possible to resist state penetration right now. So if that's true, what do you do? And frankly, the only thing that I know of isn't technical. The thing that works, we looked historically at the world and said, what works? And what worked in 1980 when Japan was doing this to the United States. So what happened then? Japan took 5 major industries out of the United States in about 5 years. DRAMs, pretty important, just about wiped out Intel. All television manufacturing, various car technologies, video recording, video cameras, playback. All that stuff went away and never came back, with the one exception that we have one company, Micron, that recently has come back with DRAMs. It never came back. Think of the social, cultural, and financial costs of losing those 5 industries, and they never came back. So what did we do? Well, Intel brought an action. It's called a Special 301. The U.S. Trade Representative agreed to do it. Intel was on its knees. It was about to be gone away forever. And the trade representative said, okay, and they filed a sanction, a tariff, against China for what they had done with DRAM. You know the Intel story. They changed from being a DRAM company to being a processor company, so they had to pivot anyway. But the result was Japan got the message. And this is interesting. It was an economic message for an economic attack. Cyber attacks aren't cyber attacks, they're economic attacks. Of the type that I'm discussing, these are economic attacks. This has nothing to do with cyber. As a matter of fact, 80% or so of all the thefts of IP, of your crown jewels, happen from your own employees or from spies who look like employees. It doesn't even happen with cyber. It's only about the economy. It's not about the way that it happens. It's about the thing that happens. And the thing that's happening is it's an economic war. It is literally a war between one nation and another. And the goal isn't competition. It's not like the good old days. It's not like one company fighting it out with the other company. The goal is the state punches through that shell company and wipes out the competition globally. That's the goal. So it's very different from our parents and what they had to face. If you use an economic response, it works. So instead of worrying too much about the technical issues of what's your router doing today, we have decided to worry about the economic response because we've seen historically that this is the best answer. The result of years of work was that at the last year of the Obama administration, for the first time ever, after I would say 12 years of complaining diplomatically, Obama said, I have some sanctions in my back pocket that I'm going to bring into bearing within the next week or two if you guys don't shape up. And within 3 days, he had a conversation with the Chinese. And within 2 weeks, we had a new treaty. After 12 years of screwing around. It really does work. And within, I would say, 3 months, there was the same treaty with the EU and with the UK and with G20. not to use cyber for commercial theft of crown jewel IP. And they pretty much stuck to it, which is truly amazing. Recently, they slipped a little bit, but basically, they kind of stuck to it. Wow, why didn't we do that 12 years ago? So when one looks at the problem of cybersecurity, if the issue is the most important things that you've got and the most expensive to protect, the answer is not going to ultimately be buy a better router. The answer is going to be stand up and create an economic response. And if you do that, it will work. And a better answer is to do that with your friends. So when we look at, you may have seen this morning, there was a note that was made about something that we invented called flow economics, which I think is the best way to understand the economy today, how things flow through a country or a company. When we look at the world, we see it pretty much in black and white. Here is the world, here are all these countries, what do? Oh, you're the UK, you invent things. Oh, you're Sweden, you invent things. Okay, you're Germany, you invent things. Oh, you're China, you steal those things. It's really simple. It's not nuanced. There's nothing complicated about this. And so, literally, not only should, I think, if you really care about this, if you want to solve this problem, is it not only not really a cybersecurity problem, but as you stand up with friends. Because markets are talking. It's about market power. And don't say to yourself, well, we're just Sweden, we're a little too small to do this. Do it with the United States, do it with the UK, do it with Germany, do it with the rest of the EU, do it with Australia. The more the merrier. It's a very simple equation, it's math. It's just adding things up. And the more customers who get in the way and make it too expensive, the faster this is all going to stop or be reduced. All right, end of that speech. Part of what I was asked to talk about was InfoWar and all the things that we're having troubles with right now in the US. I think I've had 3 questions today about the upcoming election in Sweden. I want to go back and say one more thing. I've got a lot of questions about Ericsson today because Ericsson is an important company in Sweden. Huawei is not Sweden's friend, despite what I'm now calling the Huawei Arlanda airport. Huawei is Sweden's enemy. I can't make it any simpler than that. So take care of yourselves. Stand up for these things. The government of Sweden needs to recognize this is not competition, this is an attack. And they need to help Ericsson resist that attack. I'm hoping that there are people in this room who could help do that. It's worth protecting Ericsson. Ericsson might be a little old, might need to have new product refreshes, maybe some management changes, I don't know, but save the company. All right. The InfoWar experience that we went through is not unique. In fact, we at our fire conference, we had an interesting and very exciting and informative set of talks by some people from Ukraine. And their attitude is, we're the test bed for what you're going through. The Russians start with us, and then what works, they bring to the United States. And I think that Latvia, I think Estonia, there are a lot of other folks who would say the same things. So, you get to be next, I would assume. I think that, if I understand this properly, there is now a question in Britain whether the Brexit referendum vote was also part of this manipulation. Yesterday, the Secretary of Defense in Spain asked a question about Catalonia. It's the same question. I don't know the answer, but I'm assuming that the answer is probably yes. I mean, why wouldn't you? If you had the goal of dividing the EU, why wouldn't you? If you could do it without attribution, even with a little attribution, and that's your goal, and it doesn't cost anything, why wouldn't you do it? It's pretty easy. So here's how easy it is. You don't even have to lie. All you have to do is take existing news feeds and direct them to those whose psychology responds best to those particular ideas. whether you're talking about gun rights or black people being shot in America by police, anything that will divide the country, you just take those news feeds and amplify them and send them to a person who is most likely to change their vote based on that. It's very straightforward. My daughter runs a company called Scout.ai, and she and her husband have become the world experts on this, I think, which is kind of interesting for her dad. And so she was just in Europe yesterday talking about this issue. She's been here twice. She out-debated Carl Bildt recently on the same issue. So she's pretty smart about this. And she identified, you may have heard of this company, Cambridge Analytica. Anybody heard of this? Some, okay. This is a company which was unheard of, I think, until the election or just after the election. They worked both for the Trump campaign and for the Clinton campaign, but they ended up with Trump. And the CEO claims that he has the psychological profile of every single American voter. He has 250 million cases of exactly who you are and what would move you in this way I just described. And he takes that information plus social network information database, so he's going to Facebook and Twitter and so forth. He interlaces those two things, and he claims he can get whatever he wants in a vote by doing what I'm describing. I don't know if it's true, but I'll tell you, to us it feels like it's true, because most of us can't believe that this guy Trump got elected. So let's just say that it is true. We are now living in a time where, and picture this is the ultimate cyber attack. Advertising. I've got a friend named Roger McNamee, who's a very famous VC, probably have heard of him, Elevation Partners. We saw Roger 3 or 4 days ago, and he went on stage and he said, advertising, he's an investor in Facebook and Google. He said, advertising has destroyed democracy. I'm sorry I invested. The things that were okay when they were on TV or in a magazine, when you bring them into the internet world, so I want to identify who you are and what it's going to take to get you to buy a blue car, right? Blue Toyota or Volvo. No, it's Chinese. I can't sell you Volvo anymore. So I happen to know whatever, and you're at Facebook, you post some pictures, you had a birthday party, you went somewhere, you did a football thing. Pretty soon I know a lot about you. It's an advertising story. It's just an advertising story, right? I'm just trying to sell you a car. But the information that I have about you and who your friends are, what circles you travel in, who you talk to on the net, on and on and on and on. I've got all that. Now, if I were willing to sell that to Russia for $1, cheap, what happens then? All the work that went into getting a precise profile of who you are just to sell you some flowers or something suddenly is in the hands of somebody who wants to change the course of Sweden and can. Well, that's not good. So we by accident have built the perfect machine, not just for selling blue cars, but for destroying democracy. The fact that we have freedom of speech is our weakest vulnerability. And cyber is being used for information warfare in that way. And people who tell you it can be fixed easily, I don't think they know what they're talking about. And if you had to guess, how many bots are out there tonight that are under, make up anybody, Mexican or Russian or American control? Who knows? Who knows? I'm sure we do it too. I have no idea what the number is, but it's not zero. I said to somebody the other day on stage, how many Facebook users are Facebook users? And how many of those friends you have are bots? And my friend David said, I heard 10%. And I said, well, I'm thinking 20 to 40. No one knows. Mark Zuckerberg doesn't know. I do believe him when he says he doesn't know. I don't usually believe him, but I do believe that. So how do you deal with that if you're worried about your future Swedish election? In this world of cyber, how do you control whether that person who's your best friend on Facebook and tells you that Joe is a bad candidate for something is a bot? You're not going to ever find out. Mark Zuckerberg won't even find out. So it's a very difficult thing. And it's very easy, I think, in this day and age to create botnets. And once you've done one, you can do 100,000. That's the world of computing. So I think that there's a great risk here, not just for stealing crown jewel IP, but actually for affecting elections, for affecting how we feel about our neighbors, for affecting our sense of community, for affecting us in terms of disunity versus unity. All these things are part of the wonder of a democracy, but they're also our weakest link when we rely upon the internet for information.